The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
I asked the four top leaders in Congress whether they'd be willing to come in and talk about what we're going to do between now and Christmas in terms of legislation. And there's a lot to do, including resolving the train strike, what we're doing now. And Congress, I think, has to act to prevent it. It's not an easy call, but I think we have to do it. The economy's at risk.
Congress has to act to prevent it. It's not an easy call, but we have to do it because the economy is at risk. That was the voice of President Joe Biden sitting at a round table with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Kevin McCarthy of the Republican Party. And they were discussing how they were going to have to pass legislation to prevent the upcoming strike on December 9th and to essentially force all 12 unions that represent the railroad workers, force them to accept the negotiated deal that the Biden administration negotiated several months ago. Now, in that broker deal, there were some concessions. The railroad workers would get a $5,000 immediate bonus, and they would get retroactive pay back to 2020, a raise retroactively paid back to 2020. So there were some concessions. But the primary point of contention, for which 4 of the 12 unions rejected the offer from the Biden administration, representing some 115,000 rail workers, the primary point of contention was the fact that they had only one paid sick day offered in those negotiations. Prior to that, they had none, but they were being offered one paid sick day, and that sick day required a 30-day notice because, as we all know, 30 days in advance before you get sick, right? Now consider the requirement for many of these workers. Engineers oftentimes have to be on call 24/7. And they are already in an industry that traffics in or transports hazardous material, toxic chemicals. They have a very dangerous job, very long hours, and they're asking for paid sick days so that they could take care of themselves or their families, especially in this pandemic that so many people, including this administration, are now acting like is over. It's not. Here is Michael Baldwin, president of the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen, talking about his reaction to President Biden forcing the end to these negotiations and preventing the strike over sick days.
We're trying to address an issue here of sick time. It's very important, as we've already discussed. And this action prevents us from reaching the end of our process. It takes away the strength and the abilities that we have to force bargaining or force the railroads into a situation to actually do the right thing.
And isn't that the point of labor unions and the ability to strike, our right to strike, to force these for-profit companies that have taken hold of the most critical infrastructure in terms of transporting critical goods across this country? It has been seized by corporations who are making billions of dollars in profits, but do not want to get their workers sick leave. Well, what do you do in that scenario? You strike. And what is the president, along with Democrats and Republicans, doing? They're preventing it. Now, there was a vote yesterday. We'll talk about the 2 different pieces of legislation that passed. One, enacting the Congress's authority to block the strike. That was passed. And then 2, they also passed a piece of legislation giving these workers 7 days of sick leave. But here's the problem, and we'll discuss this more in a minute. If that doesn't pass the Senate, what ends up happening is that the strike was blocked and the workers get nothing except the one paid sick day that requires a 30-day advance notice. Here's Bernie Sanders on Chris Hayes discussing this.
Chris, in the last 3 quarters of this year alone, the railroad industry made $21 billion in profits, provided $25 billion in stock buybacks and dividends, and they are paying their CEOs, in some cases, $14 million a year, $10 million a year, $20 million a year, whatever it may be. Meanwhile, for workers on the railroads, they have zero, underlined zero, guaranteed sick leave. In other words, somebody comes down with COVID tomorrow. They're going to get penalized because they don't come into work. Somebody is having a baby, can't go to their wife's side. So what we are fighting for, and I think we stand a reasonable chance to succeed, is to take the agreement that the President and Labor Secretary negotiated and add 7 days of paid sick leave, guaranteed sick leave to that. And what I'm hearing is not only is that going to be taken up in the House tomorrow, I'm hearing that there's strong, or at least some, Republican support for it in the Senate.
Well, Bernie Sanders, I hope you're right. The House did pick it up on yesterday. They passed a piece of legislation. See, it bothers me that it was separated in two. It bothers me that this issue was separated into two pieces of legislation passed in the House, giving the Senate the opportunity to block one and keep the other. And as we all know, I could just feel already, I feel Manchin and Sinema and perhaps some other Democrats that we don't even know about yet that are gearing up to be the rotating villain just in time to make sure that the strike doesn't happen and to make sure that they don't get the 7 days of sick leave because, well, 7 days of sick leave is just too much to ask of corporations that are making billions of dollars on our critical infrastructure. CEOs who are making millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars every year. Some estimates, if we were to give, if these corporations were to give these workers 15 days of paid leave, some estimates say it would cost $688 million for all of the workers for the year, compared to the billions of dollars that these corporations are making quarterly. We act as though the corporations are the ones that are frail, that are at risk. These corporations are at no risk whatsoever, except for shaving a few percentage points off their profit margin. And perhaps 15 days may seem too much to you because Americans have gotten so used to not getting anything. Most Americans are used to not getting paid anything for a sick leave. And so that's an easy way to get people, the working class, to work against each other. But the reality of it is that we should all be getting sick paid leave. We should all be getting it. And so maybe 15 days is too much, but we're in a situation now where they're going to very possibly strike down 7 days, which would cost some estimates of $288 million. Pocket change for these corporations. Pocket change for Warren Buffett, whose Berkshire Hathaway owns a significant portion of our railroad industry. And maybe I'm just a little too apprehensive. Maybe I'm too paranoid, but I've seen this rodeo too many times in this country. And by them dividing that piece of legislation, it almost all but guarantees it gives them the opportunity, if nothing else. And we'll see how it goes. Maybe I have to eat my words. Maybe the Senate will do the right thing. Maybe the Senate will make sure that these workers at least get 7 days. If this industry is so important, wouldn't it behoove us to make sure that the workers are healthy? But I see actors like Manchin and Sinema. I see Republicans who are on one side trying to, there's a game that's being played by Republicans and by grifters who pretend to be on the left. They're trying to outflank Joe Biden from the left and make it seem like, oh, he's such a horrible person when it comes to labor. And if this happens, if it goes down the way it looks like it might go down, I will agree with them. But I do firmly believe that some of these same Republicans, like Marco Rubio, who's out here trying to sound like he's pro-labor, was going to vote against this. Or at least he's going to vote against a piece of legislation that would give them 7 sick days. I could be wrong. Let's see what happens. But how many times have we seen this play before? How many times have we seen people get set up? The labor in particular, not people, labor always gets the short end of the stick. We have so many states that are now right to work that there are more Americans who are accustomed to getting nothing for their labor except the minimum wage. Forget about sick time. That's because this country has sided with big corporations, with capital at the expense of labor for the last generation. certainly since the 80s. Started before that. But there was a period in this country where you could get a decent job, and because of labor unions, you were able to live a decent life with a decent job. But now that's too much because a CEO has to get their second yacht. But again, maybe I'm just apprehensive. Maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe it's going to go down exactly the way that Nancy Pelosi plans for it to go down, or at least said that she wants it to go down. They sent 2 bills over to the Senate. We'll see how they pass it. But at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves the question, why would they divide the bill? Why would they divide the bill in the first place? Providing the Senate the opportunity to shoot one of them down. And if it goes the right way, I mean, if they get 7 days, which is I think is a decent enough, compromise. You give, you take. But it seems like labor is a side that's always giving. And we know for sure capital is always the side that's taking. But if it goes down and they give them these 7 days, then fine. I'll come back and say salutations, salute, hand clap and everything else. But I don't know. What do you think? Leave it in the comment section. Do you believe that this is all a setup and they're going to end the strike, block the strike before it even begins, and make sure that they don't get any sick leave because, well, 288 million is too much to give hundreds of thousands of workers for the year when these corporations are making billions of dollars every quarter. It's kind of risky listening to my show because every now and then I have to engage in conversations that kind of pull the veil back from your day-to-day life, the ability to just compartmentalize away all of the horrors of our reality and just go about your business. And then every now and then I go into a conversation that makes you pause. And I don't know if you have to pull over and realize, holy crap, we are really living in a dystopian movie. We're clearly living in a capitalist authoritarian state. There's no question about that. We just got through talking about how they do labor. We're clearly living in a state that in a country on a planet, quite frankly, that is rejecting the science of COVID-19, throwing our children and our family members out into this pandemic, into this plague, maximizing the number of people who can die. And anyone who's wearing a mask is now being vilified. We've compartmentalized that. But folks, yeah, we're living in a pretty bad horror movie. Well, I got to go one step further. You do realize that we're living in the truest definition. The United States of America is the truest definition of a police state. And as I have warned for years, what began and what was mastered and perfected in the Black community was always going to spill over to every other community. I need to take you to Valley, Alabama, where police arrested an 82-year-old woman for failure to pay for her trash services. And as if that headline is not bad enough, I want you to listen to how committed to abuse this police state is in this press release from the police chief supporting and applauding this arrest. I want to read you the press release. This was put out on November 29, 2022, and it reads as follows. On November 27, 2022, officers in the Valley Police Department arrested Martha Lewis Minfield, 82 years old, of Valley, on the charge of failure to pay trash. She was processed at the police department and released on bond. City of Valley code enforcement officers issued Ms. Minfield a citation in August of 2022 for non-payment for trash services for the month of June. We're not talking about a year ago. We're talking about just a few months ago. Failure to pay for services in June, July, and August. Prior to issuing the citation, code enforcement tried to call Ms. Minfield several times and attempted to contact her in person at her residence. When contact could not be made, a door hanger was left on her residence door. The hanger contained information on the reason for the visit and named a name and a contact, etc., 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 etc. According to the Environmental Services, Ms. Minfield has had her trash services suspended 3 times in the past 2 years for non-payment, and records indicate that there have been over 22 incidents of suspensions and revocation of services since 2006. Oh, God. Oh, she's delinquent and unable to pay. 82 years old. I wonder what could possibly be keeping her from making these payments. While our officers, I'm going to continue reading without the sarcasm, while our officers can use their discretionary judgment on certain matters, the enforcement of an arrest warrant issued by the court and signed by a magistrate is not one of them. Miss Menfield was treated respectfully by our officers in the performance of their duties and was released on a bond as prescribed by the violation. Mike Reynolds, Chief of Police, Valley Police. I mean, I don't even know the race of this woman. I don't know. She could be any race. It doesn't matter. It would actually be apropos if this woman was white, so that people could clearly see just how utterly ridiculous. Because if she was black, there are going to be people in the comment section who will be like, oh, she should have paid her bills. And I'm sure you have people, no matter what color they are so committed to protecting the thin blue line police state that we live under that they will sit by and watch their own family members get arrested for nothing. Why is she having to pay for trash in the first place? She's 82 years old. She's contributed to that city enough. Can she not at least get her trash taken out without going to jail? She has to pay. She's clearly having a problem paying it, whether it be a financial problem or a technological problem, because, my God, getting my mother logged on to pay some things sometimes is very difficult. Love you, Ma. But whatever the problem is, this is the crown jewel. Like, we've gotten accustomed, folks, to them killing us. The number of police killings has increased this year. Like, they're killing more people now than ever before. Yeah, we're used to that, though. And it takes an act of God along with a damning video like George Floyd in order for us to get movement, but still no justice. So just that's baked in the cake. But now they're arresting your grandmother if she doesn't pay for her trash bill. It reminds me of it's just like how ridiculous all of this is, going back to the greed and the capitalism that we live under. Think about all of the school programs that are now throwing out lunches rather than giving them to individuals who don't have enough money to buy their school lunch. They're forced to go to school, but if they don't have enough money for lunch, they have to be hungry and they throw the food away. This is an evil system, top to bottom, back and forth. There's no question about it. And sometimes we get so inundated with our day-to-day life, not sometimes, all the times. It takes a lot for us to actually come up to 30,000 feet and see what's really happening across this nation. But we are quite literally living in the quintessential example of a police state. There is no movie out there. There's no fiction out there that is more damning than our reality. At the beginning of the pandemic, I kept saying, mentioning the movie V for Vendetta and how that entire revolution came about as a result of 80,000 people dying from whatever. I don't know if it was a pandemic, a plague, or was it a chemical, whatever it was that the government did wrong. 80,000 people died and they went into a full-blown revolution. Folks, we're over 1 million. We're probably somewhere close to 1.5 million, but we won't know because we stopped counting. They have stopped reporting. And even in the reporting, you had states like Florida who was baking the books to make it seem fewer than what was actually dying, thanks to Ron DeSantis. So, hey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news all the time. I hate to be the guy who has to tell you, wake up, Neo. You're living in a dream world. But this dream is a nightmare. The reality of what we live through every single day is that we're living underneath an authoritarian capitalistic police state that has committed itself to maximizing the number of people who die from COVID-19 because they are willing to reject science all the way to the point, I didn't even mention this, of climate disaster, catastrophe. So what do we do about it? I guess that's why most of us have to cut off that part of our brain. What do we do about it? How do we actually change this? How do we actually stop the momentum from going the way that it's going? And because most of us can't find a place to latch on to actually do something, we cut that part off in our brain and we cut on the radio and we cut on the television and we go to work and we forget about the fact that all of this is actually happening around us. And there's not a movie that you can stream that's actually worse than reality.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. In all reality, I don't have any new patrons on my list today. What is up with that? I want to thank you and you driving the car, you who's listening at work. You should be doing work, but you're listening to the podcast. You who's sharing this with your friend. I want to thank you for going to patreon.com right now. Wait a minute. Bounce. Patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get twice the content, none of the commercial interruptions, and you get access to the patron party, which we have another one coming next week. We can't do this show without you. We are not financed or sponsored by anyone else other than our patrons. So drop what you're doing. And if you enjoy this show, patreon.com/The BPD Show. And in the meantime, I'm going to jam as many commercials in right here so that you get fed up with commercials.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Speaking of the ridiculousness of this country as it pertains to COVID-19, I want to play a quick clip from Fox News as they discuss defunding the military, because the military is one of the few institutions that still has a vaccine mandate. Take a listen into this madness.
We're going to lose 20,000 because they don't want to get vaccinated. How could that be the rule of the land in this country?
Well, thankfully, we took the House. The Republicans took the House, and we're going to make sure that those type of things aren't happening when we do the appropriations process and demand to do away with the COVID vaccine, or they're not going to get their funding.
You know, I'm having a hard time figuring out where to start this particular conversation, because we already know that they don't care about the lives of citizens. But it's really strange for Fox News to be promoting this type of rhetoric and this agenda when it comes to the military, because they're supposedly so pro-military, and not just pro-military in the sense of being patriotic, but pro-military in the sense of being belligerent and willing to go to war. Especially because Fox News is one of the number one networks that engages in nonstop fear-mongering around China. And there's a clip. I don't think it's translated, so I'm not going to play it here. But there was a Chinese businessman who went viral about a month ago discussing how China's zero COVID policy compared to America's no policy whatsoever, like it's a free for all here, is going to cripple the United States and escalate, or rather accelerate, Chinese hegemony. Now, it's one thing for you to do that with the American people because y'all don't give a crap about us, but you should at least care about making sure that your military isn't all sick with long COVID. And all of the institutional knowledge and the abilities that this military has, all of a sudden imploding because of the number of disabled people that are dealing with long COVID or just outright dying. It really blows me away. So that makes me think that their commitment can't really seriously be to the American military for either patriotic reasons or even for the reasons of the future. I mean, I tell a tree by the fruit it bears. I tell a tree by the fruit it bears, and their actions, conservatives particularly, but also Democrats who are afraid to go head to head with these monsters and to ensure that we at least had mask mandates. We can't even get mask mandates. But as I look at the fruit that they're bearing, I can't help but to just come to my own conspiratorial conclusion that these people are absolutely committed to the destruction of America. They're committed to the destruction of the labor force. They don't really care about us. They feel like we just, so long as we keep popping out babies, maybe that's why they want to force birth. They need enough stock to not only give away children to parents who can't have them, to these evangelicals who are waiting in line to adopt, brand new babies. It's not just that. It's because they feel like they could just keep replacing bodies. Let the bodies keep hitting the floor and everything will be fine. Well, it's proven not to be the case. We are quickly approaching a crisis in our labor force because of the number of people who have been disabled as a result of long COVID. And now they're trying to enforce that same madness on the military in the midst of a global order change, a shift on the global stage. I think these people commitment to America has just run up. They have no more commitment to America. They have no more commitment to democracy. They have no more commitment. They never had commitment to the people. Fix that sentence. They never had commitment to the people. They always had commitment to their quarterly profit margins. And so perhaps their commitment to their quarterly profit margins, they're selling themselves short in the long run. But they can't be that ignorant. They understand projections. And so to me, it says they have invested in the demise of America, not only the labor force, but even now, this is just one clip, but this is absolutely their commitment to spreading COVID-19 everywhere they possibly can. And what is the result? You can't tell me they don't know the result. They like to pretend as though they don't know the result. The result is either death or long COVID. And if you're lucky, you just end up with blood clots for the rest of your life. COVID-19 is for the third year in a row, the third leading cause of death in this country. Heart attacks and cancer still are number 1 and number 2. COVID-19 is number 3. And we have no projected end to this pandemic. We've just given up on it. Okay, I get it. But can you still wear a mask? And perhaps we could. We could have developed a culture of wearing a mask because that is the lowest barrier of entry. But that was too much for these sociopaths who are 100% committed to seeing as many people die as they possibly can. These murderous sociopaths have done everything they can to maximize the amount of death and suffering that comes from the pandemic. And there's got to be a financial incentive behind it because there's nothing that these monsters do that is for any other reason than their own bottom line. So the only reasonable conclusion that I can come up with at this point is that they are committed to the demise of this country. This is why you have some of these same people, the same people who have sworn their allegiance to Vladimir Putin are the same people who want you to try ivermectin, which doesn't work, but not wear a mask because they think that is an atrocity. Or vaccine mandates is the greatest human rights disaster in American history. Kyrie Irving, get out of here with that mess. One last little detail about this dystopia that we're living under before I go to the patrons only segment, patreon.com/the BPD show, is the power that the rulers have to write history. The winners, the people who win the wars, write the history. And we're living in a time of revisionist history happening right now. Right now, we see at every turn, every level of school teaching, every level of education, academia, even down to Twitter, the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk and his ability to just simply edit out history, delete accounts that gave some of the best accounting of COVID-19, deleting accounts of some of the best accounting of the Nazis and the fascism that we faced during this era. They have the ability to simply erase it out of history. And those that are not literally deleted get crushed underneath the weight of the algorithm so that when someone searches what happened to COVID-19, while people are still dying from it, you get results that suggest that it never happened. It was a plandemic. Technology giveth and technology taketh away. They have the ability now to raise up an entire generation of people who will not look back and hold the people accountable that did this to us. And this is why I stopped saying that history is going to look down on these individuals. No, not if they win, because if they win, they get to write history and pretend like COVID-19 never happened. Patrons, stay tuned.